Welcome, everyone, to Cloud Security Alliance's AI Summit. Today, we have a very special presentation with myself and the Global VP of Research, John Yo. We are a double team duo on this today. We will be discussing some very important topics of artificial intelligence. Properly named today, Stop Trying to Make Fetch Happen. This is going to be more of a modern look at AI, the growth and security, and really where we're at. And so, John, I guess leading us off, this last year has been pretty crazy as far as ChatGPT has gone. CSA has done a bunch along the lines of research for it. I guess where are we at right now? A lot of companies are using artificial intelligence. Are there still situations where perhaps we should still be a little bit curious about using it, maybe take a step back?
Yeah. Man, are we here to just debunk everything and talk about AI in general or what? But there's so many ways to approach it, Sean, and I think number one is you have to address it. I think I've heard some people say that, hey, we need to attack AI like it's a burning building right now and make sure we're addressing it the right way. One of the best things I always hear is we need to meet our customers where the technology is. And with ChatGPT being introduced, I don't know anybody who hasn't played with it or even used it slightly, especially in our realm of work. So that involves everything from business applications to even security. And
Mhm.
so number one is, yes, you need to meet your customers and your staff where the technology is. I think that's something that we need to do. And two is probably we need to meet uh, technology where our adversaries are. So this has been probably the most difficult thing for security practitioners since, you know, always. But adversaries always seem to be a step ahead of us. And at the rate of these generative AI tools, these GPTs that people are using and incorporating into everything, I mean, it's accelerating how we're doing all sorts of different things, right?
Yeah. And I mean, interestingly enough, NIST came out a few days ago and they actually addressed this on a release document. And the statement essentially was these security and privacy challenges include the potential for adversarial manipulation of training data, exploitation of model vulnerabilities, malicious manipulations, modifications. And it's being addressed everywhere, kind of at these levels. NIST is an institute selected somewhat by the government for these ideas on how do we protect these things. And, you
Yeah.
know, businesses started using ChatGPT, then they pulled back because policy didn't allow for it. So for these companies, I guess how would we approach that? Why do we approach that, or how should we in even bringing ChatGPT into the business, or even other LLMs, not even ChatGPT? I know there was a concern for it. I mean, where as a business do you decide that you can start using it?
Yeah. And we need to get into the LLM technologies and everything like that too, right? So many places to start here too when we talk about using or protecting users from these generative AI tools. It reminds me a little bit of the whole cloud thing too. And since everybody knows the Cloud Security Alliance as that, we can go back as recently as even 7, 8 years. I know we can go back certainly to the 15 years that CSA has been around, to where there were no cloud policies instituted because we didn't really understand or trust a third-party environment of cloud. And that's where we sit with these large language models and these GPTs and these generative AI tools, is we don't necessarily have a trusted relationship with these third parties. And it's back to, hey, people are using them anyway. They're being incorporated into, and that might be the biggest thing too, Sean, is that all your third party services, just about all of them, are incorporating some sort of generative AI into their tool set. And they're not being developed on their own. They're being leveraged, the big three frontier models, right? We have certainly OpenAI that everybody knows about, Google DeepMind, Anthropic. I think those are the big three. There's certainly a couple others out there too that I've heard people leveraging, but we need to build some sort of trust within those large language models and understand how they work. So there's the inference models for sure, where we should probably make sure we're setting that up to where basically you need to protect what goes in and what goes out, but the large language model itself stays pretty static.
Yeah. Is that, I mean, is that then somewhat? You need to have your employees understand artificial intelligence. Your developers need to understand it because even though,
Yeah.
the assumption is they're going to be using it, I mean, should they be aware of how it's working then? Because if you're doing like security reviews, I mean, you need someone that really understands how the data is flowing, how data can be manipulated. Because I mean, if you're still trusting that third party, if you don't know how to do a review, like CSA has the cake to go through questionnaires on cloud vendors, how do we do that even with AI?
Yeah. It's just another cloud practice too, where I think we've done this forever too, where we had experts in AWS, Azure, or GCP, and we needed experts in each, across each platform to understand how to utilize, configure, and leverage that cloud services best. And that went into the hundreds, thousands of SaaS products that we're using too, where we need people that understand how to properly configure and understand how to use that tool. It's going to be the same thing here, right? And there's so many ways to leverage these large language models. People are using that as a foundation for themselves too, right? Where they're building their own databases built off of those large language models. And it comes down to, yeah, we need to understand these technologies, the people that are using them, and then the data set itself too, right? At the end of the game, we're protecting data here. So protecting the data that's being used with these generative AI models becomes just as important as ever before. And understanding how they're used in these large language models is a whole nother thing too, Sean. And went it started with definitely understanding how to protect the data itself, but what does that data look like? And if you look at these large language models too, now they're being put into multi-nodal models. We're looking at vector databases now too, so words are now converted into mathematical models and now associated that way to really generate different types of solutions and different context on how you want to see that at the end. And so, yeah, understanding how that works, what's going in, how these companies are protecting your data, because it's not just about security, it's about privacy now too. If I throw Sean Heidi and maybe some of your sensitive information into a large language model, what happens then as it's kind of dissecting and learning all about Sean and breaking it apart?
They'll kick it
Uh,
right back. They're going to hate it.
yeah, right. How do we train that out? And I know that's where vector databases are actually protecting information inside some of these language models. Some of the more advanced AI models are doing that. But it also makes it harder to understand, you know, I guess how deep some of that data goes and if you can actually train it out or if you need to. And so,
Yeah,
yeah, it's different.
it's adding more jobs to really the market too, I think right now. I mean, we've talked about it. We've talked about the security gaps for personnel. I mean, roles aren't being filled or there's too many, not enough people are getting taught the right things. And now we've introduced this whole crazy new technology at a deeper level. AI has been around for a while, but this whole LLM thing is kind of booming. So what are we going to see now, an influx of certain specialties in AI to address things like vector databases to understand maybe how that's working in cloud? I don't know if I've even seen roles like that. I've seen roles for chief artificial intelligence officers, but what are the roles under those now? I don't know if you've seen any.
Man, yeah. But the answer is yes. We're going to create new roles that to understand anything from the vector databases to just prompting, right? Are we going to become better prompters when it comes to the type of GPT models that we're using? So I think that's been a big fear too. I'm kind of glad you brought that up too, because there's this big thing about AI replacing roles and replacing jobs, and there's an advantage to that. And yes, I think that's going to happen. We saw that going back to the Industrial Revolution with factories and machines, right? Building products. We saw that in the cloud where instead of having, an army of tens to hundreds of people managing a data center, you needed much fewer people to do that because everything was done at this, virtual level, at this management plane. And so yeah, we'll see that also with AI. It's gonna definitely evolve how technologies and jobs to utilize these technologies come into play. I don't even think we know it 100% yet. Yeah, Sean, we've certainly talked about how we need prompt engineers, and I've actually seen jobs out there that we need a prompt engineers wanted. I haven't seen anything for the vector databases yet, but that's just around the corner because we need to
Yeah.
understand how to do that, like, right? And we talk about the language models. We talked about multinodal, and that's how the vector databases work, how you can turn like text into like images and things like that too.
Yeah.
But then there's also going to be the mathematical model. And I know that was a big, if we really wanted to get into the AI hype, that was one of the big things around the whole open AI drama recently was how mathematical models work, within there too. And so uh I think that's incredible because if we think about the computational model that AI takes, and that's what's incredible about leveraging the power of cloud to where you can go through, hundreds, thousands, millions of decisions before you come across the right one. If you have better mathematical reasoning and Q learning, like kind of like the Q star thing that we've seen OpenAI come up with, this helps reduce some of that too. So now we're being able to decipher risk and reward, or at least AI systems could do risk reward models. So
Yeah.
now, Sean, I like to use NFL examples.
Yes. Yes. Let's hear it.
Yeah, right. Well, so if a quarterback drops back and you're looking at across at I'll just do a generic four receiver set. You're looking at one, two, three, four options, and you go through your options and you find the most. Hey, here's I look across the field and I see my highest percentage of the completions over here, so I
Yeah.
throw it there, completion. Well, it's the NFL game works so fast too that now when you jump the line of scrimmage, you're like saying, "Hey, you know what? The way the defense is lined up, I'm just gonna completely eliminate the left side of the field and focus on the right side, and it reduces time to make decisions." So that's where mathematical reasoning is going to take place in AI, and how AI systems are going to be more efficient and faster that way. And so that's the type of reasoning that AI doesn't really do well yet,
Yeah.
but is improving upon. And so that's the kind of stuff that we're going to see adversaries take advantage of, but also
Yeah.
from a protector, if we can, at least from a percentage perspective, eliminate like, hey, you know what, 90% of our issues are going to be over here. We can focus our energy that way, save a lot of money, be a lot more efficient, and be a lot more secure because the odds of something happening over here is where we're going to focus all of our resources on.
Yeah, and a double-edged sword to that I read recently was developers need people to use these systems, these large language models. They need them in order to learn over time. The other side of that is they can't ensure that the training data is staying safe, secure, that what it's putting out isn't, creating some sort of attack service or vector just by way of how it's developed. And I think kind of how you're describing that is we need
Uh,
people to use it, but we also at the same time, like, how do we even organize efficiency for something like that? I mean, we need people to use it, but at the same time, if everyone's using it, everyone is potentially open to a form of threat in these systems. And it's just something I've seen. And, kind of to build off of that, I think recently it was CISA or it was another government organization who said a AI is not going to be the silver bullet for or defensive security teams or internal in order to use it. So, I mean, on one end of the spectrum, we have someone saying it's not a silver bullet, but everyone's using it, and there's these threats. How how do we make sense of that? That it's
yeah.
just kind of insanity to some extent.
Yeah, it gets really hard. And, there's a big responsibility, and I know we're like accountability that we're leaning on these frontier models for too. Again, I'm just going to use cloud as because it's such a relative comparison here. We rely so heavily on, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon to secure a lot of the data that we have there. And in most cases, in just about all cases, I can say that they protect my data a lot better than I do, right?
Yeah.
And if you just, I always we use that bank as a comparison to, if you go to a bank safe, they spend millions of dollars on these safes, which is way more secure than a safe that I can build myself at home, right? And so even from a developer perspective, from a large language model perspective, however we're leveraging these large language models and building, I think it's going to make a lot more sense to leverage from these frontier models
Yeah.
versus building my own LLM. And so this whole LLM as a service, Sean, you and I have talked about this, and we've heard about that term a lot. I mean, that's the real deal. And So it's going to be important. It's going to be up to organizations like CSA and CIS, and then federal agencies like CISA and what NIST is doing to ensure that we're able to secure these platforms, but also hold them accountable. Like, can they demonstrate how they're protecting our data that we're putting in there? Can they demonstrate how they're training their data securely and training out any biases or sensitive data that gets kind of lumped into there somehow by their customers? And so that's the road ahead I think that we have. And it's so important. I think that's where the controversy, if we want to call it controversy, is we're moving so quickly with this technology. Are we making sure that we're able to secure it and that these large language models that we're leveraging, these frontier models that we're leveraging, can they demonstrate that they're protecting our data so that we can use it as quickly as possible, but
Yeah.
making sure that we're doing it safely, right? And that's the big challenge.
So does the assurance there need to start at those frontier models then? I know we're doing a lot of work on understanding through our working groups for the AI initiatives at CSA. We're kind of focusing on the customer, but kind of what you said, John, is that, do we need to help push these companies for frontier models to kind of have a lot of that due diligence in place first so customers can secure themselves? I mean, after all I've looked at, and I'm not a developer by any means, but a lot of traditional security controls, mitigations, risk matrices, they all relatively stay the same. You're just adding a different component of data and how that data is being used and where it's being stored. So, do we need to start at those frontier models then? Is that something that should be of higher importance over time?
Yeah, I think it's something that happens at the same time, right? If we look at cloud, the hyperscalers, uh, I still think they're super secure, but they're not perfect. And so they're continuously improving those platforms. But what we do continuously also need to do is make sure that customers understand their environment and what they have control over.
Yeah.
So shared responsibility, whether it's cloud, whether it's now these new large language models, what's the difference? How do we understand how that works? And it's always one of those things too, and it happens all the time, Sean. I think I've talked about this, and I know you've talked about this too with me several times, where there'll be a new feature that comes out, and I'm always a big fan of some of the container registry services that come out with these new infrastructure providers, where you can actually leverage other templates and share templates that you're utilizing. And in one of the major hyperscaler platforms, they made it so that you can share your container templates with others, which I think is fantastic because that's what, community development and community security is all about. But when they originally did that, they made these files open to the public, and so now you're exposing not
Yeah.
just your template, but whatever you're hosting that in, publicly. They did fix that, right? Once that was discovered, once it was disclosed, they were able to fix that. But even though that feature is there, you can't turn it on because you have to turn it on within a customer environment. So it's like, hey, new feature to secure your platform, but you have to change that yourself before,
Yeah.
you have to just change it yourself. Going forward, it's going to be, you know, by default, it'll be turned off, but you can't go back and play with a customer's platform. I mean, that's just a complete violation of a multi-tenant environment, right? So I understand why a hyperscaler would do that. But it just goes back into like, hey, how do we educate people, especially early adopters with large language models? And if we're turning on new security features and compliance functions, man, that's a whole another challenge that we'll have to face with just using new technologies, and of course being an early adopter with a new technology too.
Yeah, I think we're almost there. I mean, we're focusing on the shared responsibility model now, as you know, and or at least
Yeah.
trying to adopt it in some form with the cloud controls matrix. I want to kind of shift gears quickly because I mean, I know at the start we talked about is AI being accepted by businesses. It's kind of like the cryptocurrency fear and guide index. And so I think this last year, ChatGPT came out the first week, people loved it. And then after the first few weeks, they're like, oh, this actually might have a ton of potential issues for personal information or company data going into it. So we dropped down on the chart. Now I think we're kind of going back up once, Microsoft announced they're using it for Copilot, Google Bard, things like that. I mean, at this point, have you seen any companies really just shun the fact of no AI, no tolerance, zero tolerance? And if like I've maybe seen it one or two places, and I suspect that they're going to kind of recirculate. Do you think it's in the better judgment though of these companies to kind of embrace it right now? I mean,
Yeah.
I could see it impact our team. We've talked about security and we've used it on our team in research. Is there any case where someone shouldn't? Or, I mean, what are the benefits right now of this?
Ooh, I know, right? There's always a legal aspect of these things, isn't there? And there were a ton of companies, big, like Fortune 100 companies that had, you know, no generative AI use policies, like pretty strict. Like it couldn't even be used for code development, couldn't be used for marketing materials. And today we see that as the greatest benefits of those, right? We're going to accelerate uh, uh, code writing very effectively, and it can reduce anything that we're doing from a marketing perspective too. We've used it to reduce the size of abstracts a number of times just to put something up on our website, and it seems
Yeah.
to do it pretty effectively, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can turn out a picture now in 100 different programs, and it's probably
Oh
better than
man,
anything I have ever done in Photoshop or any designer software.
yeah. So, I mean, I think yes, of course. I always think we need to again meet the technology where our customers and our staff and our adversaries are. And I get why there are these kind of no use policies because we don't want to be reckless with these things. We need to understand it better before we, you know, give it out to our staff or our customers to utilize. And I think that's where we're at, Sean. I do think all these no use policies that I saw, gosh, like a year ago now, actually, it is almost exactly a year ago now. Uh, I think they have definitely relaxed on them a little bit.
No.
Are they 100% embracing them? I can't speak to that yet, but I just know they have become more flexible in the use of things like ChatGPT,
Yeah.
Google Bard, and
I think they're
Anthropic's
confused though,
Claude.
right? Like I think a lot of confusion came from that because I think companies started allowing it because there isn't enough information or I guess proof that it's going to cause grave harm. And we've had back and forth discussions on this the last year on the data doesn't matter, the data does matter. And I think that's kind of maybe where that middle ground has been at now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think understanding how to use the language models became such an important thing too, right? Where people didn't understand, like, hey, if I'm putting, well, first of all, we don't have any control of what our employees are putting into there. I'll just say they're putting in, budget information or something like that. How does that expose our custom, our company and our intellectual property that we have? And so, yeah, I think policies and guidelines around that, making sure we're not putting in sensitive information, maybe making sure that we always have the paid versions of some of these toolings too. And I think this goes back to, boy, just email service that we've been using, SaaS email services, like even like Office 365 for forever. Paid services give you the ability to turn on a lot of different privacy functions.
Yeah.
And so I think that exists today too, where I at least know in Chat GPT Plus, because I've used that heavily. I think we've all used that heavily. There's a function where you can turn, inference on so that the system's not learning on what I'm giving it. Now it is privately on my back end. So as I'm, in as I'm inputting into the Chat GPT, it's taking, what I'm saying into consideration, but it's not using what it's learning. It's not learning from me and using that on, you know, the general platform. So you can actually turn that function off and on, and it becomes, a little bit different. So now it becomes really a traditional, cloud SaaS security issue,
Yeah.
right? Versus
I,
a large language model security issue.
Yeah, well, I've had, funny you mentioned that. I've heard, kind of not conspiracies, but I guess just the general public maybe who doesn't use it so often. They're like, oh, it's learning off everything I do. And I think the one thing is kind of that social awareness of, well, maybe knowledge. There is a feature where you can actually turn that off. And, but again, this comes back to the controls are there, they exist, and this goes for enterprise or whether you're using it at your own personal home use level, is you have to dig a little bit, but those things do exist, because that came up in a thread or someone was telling me that, and I was like, no, you can switch that off. It's not going to learn from you at all. And
Yeah.
if you're me, I don't know if you want it to learn from someone like me. It's just the system might get dumber. So, um,
Hardly. I don't believe that for a second. But an interesting side of that too, Sean, is we need to make sure that these companies, the frontier models, they can demonstrate that too. This goes back to, again, living in the cloud world where, every hyperscaler, I'm using the hyperscaler term now for in replacement of infrastructure as a service, but the hyperscalers, you could always control what region you're using your data centers in, right? The availability zones.
no,
And there were some, you know, government, federal agencies in other countries that have major data sovereignty issues that, how do I know for sure? So I turn it off, but where are my guarantees that it's definitely staying within that region? And on the back end of that, obviously there's a lot of security controls and audits that these major cloud service providers had to go through to demonstrate that, that virtual function worked. And there were even instances where they didn't even want to make it possible that could happen, right? And so that's where, we've never had, I don't think we've ever had, now maybe someone can correct me, but I don't think we've had an instance like that with large language models where click a button, can you demonstrate to me, can you prove that, my data is not going into the training of that model? And so that's
yeah.
something that frontier models will have to demonstrate and prove. And it's up to, security programs to make sure that those policies exist and they can be proved and demonstrated.
Shoot, that's something we probably could have used with just regular cloud applications over time. I mean, I've ran into a few that, I believe they North American based companies, but when you go and do a security review, that they're hosting an AWS server out of Europe. And for instance, I believe it was a Canadian company, and you can't have that cross
Yeah.
country data, right? And so, I mean, I guess we're learning things from
Yeah.
each other on the AI and the back to security front for cloud.
Yeah, yeah. I think you know that better than anybody because I know you're up there too, and the
Yeah.
province that you're in is super high on privacy and sovereignty, and so yeah, they want platforms, databases, and services that are built within that region, and so yeah, we've gone through a very extensive uh, testing and controls to show that. I know the STAR program, the CSA STAR program, even played a big role there too, where uh, STAR vetted certain companies to make sure that those capabilities existed, and they had to demonstrate it within that platform and within that control, show evidence around that. And so, yeah, I think we're there, or at least we need to get there with the large language models. And I know, Sean, we're doing that, right? One of our working groups is actually focusing on specifically on AI controls and the difference between. So it's going to hopefully answer this question this year of existing, whether you call their NIST controls, ISA controls, SOC 2 controls, or CCM controls. How do we extend those controls for large language models and generative AI so that we have to do, what extra do we need to do to show that your data is secure, your access is secure, and if privacy is involved there too, I'm sure, we'll look at some of those as well.
How many companies are going to be impacted by that? I mean, that's everyone. If
Yeah,
even if you're using Microsoft Copilot, I mean, you're using a form of generative training, for instance, if you're using it for security or even in a Word document and you're having it auto populate something for you. I mean, something somewhere is being trained on the data. And I mean, this touches everything, right? I don't think every company should at least understand where they're at in this whole spectrum of large language models, I would think.
yeah. That's something that you're not going to be able to avoid, right? It's going to be integrated into every single tool that we have. I think where it gets interesting though, Sean, is the term AI and how it's being used and
Mhm.
how it's being leveraged in these solutions. And there's so many levels of it. I think, earlier we talked about the whole generative AI piece, the multinodal piece, the mathematics part. Like how much is that going to be integrated
Yeah.
versus just I mean, AI models go back to the 50s, right?
Yeah.
The first chatbot was actually developed in the 60s, and so we're talking about, nothing's new here. We've used uh predictive text. I mean, if your iPhone or Android, that's been doing that for forever. Your
Yep.
email, your Gmail's been doing that. Not forever, but it's been doing that for a very long time. And so to me, how much generative AI is being leveraged versus the like its counterpart, the discriminative AI, where
Hmm.
we're just, taking existing data, categorizing it or recategorizing it and understanding, how applicable is there, which is super valuable. And I know we've been doing that for a while in a lot of systems. I think the marketing term of AI just now is like, hey, let's just highlight these existing features
Yeah.
called AI, and it is. AI is a broad category, a broad discipline, and we're just using that from a marketing perspective. But the real stuff is, and we are seeing it with the co-pilotization of of SaaS and Office 365 and just in cloud in general, where we're taking existing data sets and then coming up with potentially new ways to categorize data
Mhm.
and new ways to just use data for your business application. So that's where the generative part takes place. And I know there is a delineation between the discriminative part and the generative part. It's a combination of both, and that's where, boy, the understanding of AI is going to be pretty different
Yeah.
because, dude, I'll question that. Hey, the way these AI models are using, these generative models are evolving is it's going to evolve past the point where, I mean, how do
Yeah.
we know? Yeah, how do we know when it gets to that point because we're not going to understand it ourselves, right?
Well,
So yeah,
exactly. I
yeah,
just I think we've barely scratched the surface of what we know it, and I think we're probably going to come back to this, this discussion between you and I, and look back and see, exactly how much things have changed. Because I think since what last November, look how far we've come now. I mean, every company had AI, but they're generating GPT into it. In some instances, they're kicking off entire marketing plans around this artificial intelligence push. And something that I think I kind of want to ask now is from this last year on that topic. What's been the craziest thing that you have used AI or GPT for this year? I guess for me, the craziest thing was when I could go onto a whiteboard, jot something down, an idea, a mind map, and I could feed it into ChatGPT, and now it's laid out a whole game plan for me on how to accomplish something. That was the wildest thing to me. And I mean that's pretty simplistic. I know you've used it for quite a few things. Is there anything, whether security or personal, that has just been like mind-boggling this last year for you?
yeah. The stuff for me too, and it's not like focused on my day-to-day business. I should almost have an example of each, but I'll start with something just to me, it's just the multinodal part where you're
Yeah.
having it generate images out of just like scenarios. And I'll just call out because I think it's one of the better uh, image diffusion products out there, Midjourney.
Yeah.
So I've used that to just create like basic scenarios of like, hey, like, create a uh, a video game image of a cybersecurity threat model,
Yeah.
and then now make this more the image of like Atari, Pac-Man, and Donkey Kong, and just to see it evolve and the imagery get really distinct. And I mean, it gets like that particular one in particular is pretty impressive. I've used Dolly too, and Dolly gives me good simple images too.
Yeah.
But with Midjourney, I've seen some just outrageous detail, and to think that AI created this piece of art, which it's unbelievable. I mean, it would take me a lot of money or a lot of time with a graphic designer to come up with something like that.
A
And
bit of
it did
both.
it
Yeah.
in seconds, man. Yeah, it's gnarly, man. It's pretty cool where we're at today. And I know that's going to get into the whole understanding. And we've seen it already take over Hollywood
Yeah.
with the Actors Guild. And oh my gosh, it's going to create, we're going to have, AI developed movies.
Yeah.
And I'll say this too, Sean, the amount of crappy movies that I saw over the holiday season, hey, for some of those ones, let AI take over because the
Hey,
AI can do as good or as crappy job as some of these holiday movies that I watched this past
I
season.
I agree. I mean, so because of that, and I know you're a Cowboys fan. Recently, they have predictive model generation for graphics now. I don't know if you saw this. I saw it yesterday. Someone was doing the NFL playoffs predictive modeling with Midjourney. I think it was either Dali or Midjourney. They were actually like, all right, based on the performance of these teams this year, based on this outlier number, give me a graphic of the winning teams basically in their winning stance over the other team. And I think actually the Cowboys were, I think they had the first round on one of the photos. So we'll see how accurate it was. But I mean, this coming back to security, the ability to have predictive modeling, and who knows, maybe there is like, hey, let's make a prediction or a forecasting photo of where you think security is going to be at in 10 years. And it pops out some Terminator photo. But I mean, that's kind of where we're at, and it's just it is. To your point,
Yeah.
it's kind of mind-boggling that we have a system that can just do this faster than any human can. And for security, how big is that?
Yeah, right. What's the biggest challenges are time to detect, time to respond, and this is I think that's where yeah, it's going to be super helpful. Like
Yep.
just understanding, hey, here's where your vulnerabilities are, or here's where your breach was. Here's the attack path that was taken, and then now we can shut things off. And oh, from the vulnerability perspective, I think it comes even better too. Let's go recently when the Log4Shell vulnerability came out, and we had to look for where we're using Log4j catalogs, and people had to build these out themselves, and it took several days,
Yep.
literally several days to find out where this is being utilized, and so you're exposed for that long of a time. And if we can now do that so much quicker and instantly, and that's where I think that's where the really interesting thing is going to
Mhm.
happen. And we're going to see that pretty quickly, Sean. I know that whole mathematical model, the mathematical reasoning, where, understanding percentages where you can reduce, that area of focus. Maybe let's see how long it takes to do stuff like that,
Yeah.
because there's always the element too. And I'll use that NFL example again too, where like, hey, you know what? It's all situational because if it's the beginning of the game and I see if I can reduce the half of the field and be like, all right, let's focus 92% of my completions are going to happen over here. I'm going to focus on that. But situationally, if there's only 1 minute left in the game, if my reward is higher, even though it's only an 8% chance, I can actually understand like, hey, in this situation, I need to go that way.
Mhm.
And so there's different advantages, right? When we can really understand risk and reward with these AI models, that's what's going to completely change. And I bet you there's some people who would argue with me that we can do that now.
Yeah.
I think, like I said, I think with Q learning and AI, I think that will just be improved. And so maybe we can do that now, but it's going to be so much more efficient, when we can master that. And
Yeah.
yeah, how far away are we away at doing something like that? Yeah, boy, I'm not sure yet.
No. And for I mean, for the listeners to the fact, I mean, the disadvantage that pops out immediately now is, you're talking about this football game, understanding the offense needs to understand what part of the field to throw to for the defense, but to know that you have to actually have the information in the first place. So this is making an assumption that the training model probably needs that data to learn. And so if a company is giving and feeding this information to make themselves better, at what point does that itself become a risk? Because now this language model is understanding the exact attack
Mm,
paths within this company. And I think that's something too that continuously is on people's minds. I know it's on my mind because you always go back to data. I mean, when you first get into security, it's learn the CIA triad, learn all about that, learn where data goes. It's the most important thing. Well, if you think about that, and I'm giving a system kind of full reign to understand my architecture, I mean, that's a bit worrisome. And then I think that's just for some listeners who are like, okay, well, there are those positives, but here's some negatives to it.
yeah. It's a blueprint to protect or attack,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, that's an excellent point too. I think that's the advantage of a security service, a security company to if you have enough customers or you can look at enough environments, you can actually build those patterns like, hey, look, here's the patterns of attack. This is where we can protect. Use my service because we have a lot of we have the data for that. That data can be used on the other side of that too. We're like, hey, guess what? We know, where to attack, where to push, and even if it's a low percentage of an attack, you do it enough times, right? If it's a 2% a chance of an attack, and even lower than that, you do it enough times, you're going to win somewhere. And we know attackers like to do that too. It's not always targeted. It's often not targeted. It's a blanket attack, and we're gonna, see who didn't do their hygiene, and that's
Yeah.
what we're gonna expose. And this goes to individuals too, right? Companies can do everything right too. Do we have, the staff that are going to make the right decisions and not going to click on that, open that email? We've seen that a million times too, right? Where as good as your email filters are, some of those phishing emails will get through. Do you have employees that are going to make the right decisions? And uh, well, that might be a whole nother
I was just going to
thing to
say
do.
that's a whole other discussion too, because I actually had something pulled up in case we got to it. Think we're a little late now. Gen AI's impact on phishing emails. And
Mm,
so we're talking about making sure they don't click that email. Gen AI is now creating, and I mean, they're proving it now. Attackers, cyber criminals are using ChatGPT to kind of enhance English, to enhance their own language, so there's no misspellings. It seems more calculated business. I think that's a whole other discussion for us, but I mean, it's kind of to
mm.
build off that. At what point is it just regular, normal language that it's learned from individuals within your business now, and it sounds like HR? I mean, that's huge.
Yeah. There's going to be we're going to have to different ways to, authenticate even emails now, right? And
Yeah,
I think there certainly always is, right? I mean, I think, I know we've seen some people duped by deep fakes, not just emails, but even phone calls where now the CEO calls a CFO to transfer money or something like that
yeah,
too. We got to bake in different ways to authenticate. We got to personalize things and humanize things so that we know, like if, Sean, if I got a message from you, we have a relationship still where, we can ensure that, all right, is this what Sean's really asking for,
yeah.
or is this what really John's asking for Sean? And uh, yeah, I guess the bigger the company, that's not always possible. But man, it's always an interesting thing, not just from phishing attacks, but if we're using AI to build better, phishing emails, can we use AI to build better training for people too, right? So we can
Yeah,
discover things faster and
totally.
yeah.
And
Although we do know that no matter what, there's a small percentage of your staff that will always, that will always make that same mistake over and over again. And
oh
so,
yeah,
yeah,
I,
that
I
just
mean,
happens.
training companies are there for a reason. There's a reason that we've had 20, 30, well before I was probably born, security training. And I mean, there's a reason we learn, but we don't push it over and over again for the thought of it acting aligned, right? Like we continuously make mistakes. We don't really, it takes 6 months to make another mistake after I just did phishing training. And so I think this is a good roundabout spot to go back to the title quick and remind everyone we wanted to stop trying to make fetch happen. So, John, you know, fetch is the word here. AI, people still, I think, are doubting if it's a long term thing. It's just going to be something that's a fad. It's going to go away tomorrow. People are going to forget about it. Do you think that we've only just scratched the surface? I don't foresee that it's going anywhere. I think actually it's probably going to just continuously grow and be one of the larger things like cloud is now. I don't know if you share that perspective or not, but I would love to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah, we see trends and fads all the time. Hey, we can go back to blockchain just a few years ago where people thought that was going to be integrated into everything. Uh,
Yeah.
in the short amount of time that Chat GPT's been around, and I know you and I talk about like BC, before Chat GPT and all the time, and uh,
Copyright.
yeah, right. But I mean, we've seen just in the short time, this is like a little over a year now, we've seen the massive incorporation of generative AI, even GPT into tools. And so yeah, that trend I think is pretty much cemented itself.
No.
And it's the approach that we're taking at CSA too, that this is just the evolution of cloud, right? This is cloud version 2, 3, 4, wherever you think it's at. But especially when we look at literally the co-pilotization that Microsoft, one of the largest cloud providers in the world, is using everywhere. Yeah, that's just one large example of AI being used and being a part of a given tool set. So this whole evolution from virtualization to cloud and the whole scalability and on-demand use of cloud to the whole cloud native capabilities with containers and cloud native tooling and DevOps now into the use of large language models and generative AI in the cloud. To me, this is just an evolution of technology, and yeah, is it here to stay? I mean, is there a chance, Sean, that 2 years from now we're talking about like, oh, remember that whole AI hype where they were in they're inputting to everything and now they wiped it out of everything?
Yeah.
Yeah, hey, maybe that happens, Sean. I'm gonna bet on that it's gonna be everywhere. And either way, this is the thing too, as security practitioners, and I know that's who we're talking to. Uh, if your customers are using it, if your staff is using it, we have to protect it. We have to understand it. And so that's one role that we get to play. We certainly do like to be predictive sometimes, Sean, but as protectors, we just have to address everything. And
Yep.
so whether it's a trend, whether it's going to be something forever, we have to understand it. We have to protect against it. We have to build controls around it so that when our customers are using it, when our staff is using it, our companies, or at least our risk is mitigated and reduced.
Yep. Yeah, we're taking our best shot at it. And with the working groups at CSA, I mean, we continuously are having such a large, substantial number of people coming in telling us that this is a thing, that this needs to be a thing. And so I think just from that perspective, I mean, these have been some of the largest concurrent working groups as far as numbers go that I think I've ever seen since I've been here. And for me, that's foretelling of, we're doing
Yeah.
the right thing. Maybe things, I think people are pushing things out fast, but it's just addressing it, which we are. And for the listeners, please, if you have not been a part of it, we're happy to have you join us on these working group initiatives for AI. We have 4 separate ones. Need all the help we can get, I think, and get all the opinions we can get.
Yeah. I will say I'm excited to see some of the guidance and best practices that come out of there. And I did want to ask you too, Sean, like what you're most excited that the working groups are working on right now. But I will say this too, where we need to understand AI, and there's going to be guidance that CSA will put out, NIST and other, other, like not just federal agencies, but other organizations will put out to help us understand AI and adopt it more securely. But until then, the best way to understand it is to be a part of working groups like that CSA's put together, where we're talking about these things on a daily, weekly basis. We get a consensus, and then we crush everything together and put it out for people to follow. But it takes months for this to happen. If you're involved, you're ahead of the game, and you can even start, educating your own teams about it, implementing and updating some of your security policies ahead of time too. So you don't have to wait till the very end to start putting stuff together. Get involved now, and you can start, educating and protecting your organization right away. And so I encourage people to just, be a part of something. It's great to be at the end and consume it and adopt it, but be a part of it. And man, it just helps things happen for you so much faster.
It really does. I mean, no truer words could be spoken on that because I mean, we could have one individual just change completely everything. And we've had that happen before, just completely change the mindset, the thought process. And so every little contribution helps. And I mean, it's fun to network with like-minded individuals on these things too. And so my to answer your question previously, John, I think my
Yeah.
part so far, or what I'm most excited for this year is the kind of the governance and compliance area. We're doing something along the lines of identifying policies, standards, frameworks from every country. And the big thing for me right now is I like to have things mapped. I like to have things addressed from every area on how they impact. So, NIST has CIS mappings. We have mappings of our CCM to all of these other control frameworks that are out there. Something like that needs to be done at a policy level, which we're actually actively addressing. All these countries, all these different legislations, these governments are creating different things, and it's not really making sense. It's almost muddying the water a bit because one country says focus on this, another says no. You have another that just completely puts a stop to something. I think everyone, companies, even individual users need to understand from a large picture what that all means. And that's what we're currently doing. That working group is working towards that. We have some brilliant minds kind of gathering all these pieces together just to generate an overview. Because I don't think we have an overview that makes sense out there. Because if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to, we're doing controls, but you're not going to be able to have a set number of controls that touch all these different areas. Because it's not just North America that's impacted by this, it's all the rest of the world. And, oftentimes, sometimes North America has the standards that come first, but a lot of these other countries are moving a lot faster than we are. And so I think it's important to understand what they're doing and how they're viewing it. So that's one of the more, I guess, I won't say interesting. It's all very interesting. It's one of the more things I'm passionate about because I think that's a starting point for us right now.
Yeah, that's a good one, boy. Because you're right, it doesn't impact. I mean, you and I are in different countries, and so we're each impacted differently by the use of technologies. And for companies, if you're a big company, I mean, we all want to expand, we all want to grow, right? And so this impacts all of us. If you're a US based company, if you're a UK based company, I think you want customers, across the Atlantic, and so you're gonna have to learn how to govern and meet compliance in all those areas in order to do that. I think it needs to be better too. I think there's an AI opportunity there to meet that whole streamlining of compliance, reciprocity across how one control meets several frameworks. I'm hoping there's an element there too, Sean. I think right now we're trying to understand controls and how controls are either, is this something that you monitor on an annual basis or on a weekly or monthly basis? What's the cadence of that control, and how does
Yep.
AI impact that, or how does that control expand to AI? I know we're focusing on that area right now, but in order to streamline the use of technology to companies, like especially if we're sitting on these security policies, we're like, hey, no use this.
Yep.
We know federal agencies are very strict at that too because the data is very sensitive. If we can increase that reciprocity and make sure that companies, federal agencies, countries can use generative AI and all these new AI tools, that's what's going to keep us at least on pace with the adversaries so that we can protect our systems better. So I'm looking forward to making sure that we're able to do that. It's fun and I do follow the AI race. There's many people that I follow because they're so ahead of how, new features are being, delivered every single week.
Yep.
But you and I also are trying to protect things, and so empowering companies to utilize these companies so we can protect ourselves. That's, to me, that's the difference. As long as we can reduce that gap, we can be better off.
Yep. We can only learn from each other. I mean, private, public, I think those lines of communication need to be open. Just we can all help one another. And I think we're all trying to do that as a common theme. And, like we did with security cloud, there's all these support groups for it. There's all these online knowledge portals. I think this is no different. I think we need to understand one another at that level too. So I completely agree with that. I think this is about all we had for today, John. I don't know, this is the time for closing statements, I'll say. Is there anything final that I guess, or takeaway for what we have going on this year, aside from everything we've discussed, that you want to put out there?
Well, it's funny when you said support groups something, and it was like, is that what our working groups do? Are they just support groups?
Sometimes I would, if you
They
if you don't want to learn anything else, we're there to at least talk. So
they kind of are, right? I would just say this too, and it kind of plays nice into that too, where this technology moves fast, and with AI, it's moving faster than I've ever seen it, like faster than I've ever seen it. Like the incorporation of, like the adoption of ChatGPT, how different it is, the incorporation of these GPTs and generative AI tools into existing products is happening so fast. And we are working very hard on building best practices, guidance, and assisting with regulation of these tools and products. I'm being repetitive here, but the best way to stay ahead of it is let's not wait for things to come out. Let's be a part of responding to executive orders, be a part of these working groups or support groups, whatever we want to call them, so that we can actually make sure that our companies and that ourselves we're ahead of the curve, and we're ahead of the ball instead of waiting for something to just happen. And I think CSAs, that's probably where our bread and butter is getting people in the room to talk about what the real issues are and then addressing it. And I know the outcomes are fantastic because we produced over 600 best practices documents over the last 15 years. But being a part of it, especially right now, being a part of that development is going to be so much more important because we need to know before, CSA publishes something in May of 2024, be a part of it so that you know what's coming and you know how to protect systems or how to adopt large language models, before we even release something. And so you're gonna, being a part of creating these publications, just, helps you react that much faster. And so, yeah, come join
Awesome.
the effort.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really solid spot to end. John, I really had fun on this discussion. I hope everyone viewing this has the rest of a good time on the CSA AI Summit. I hope this won't be the last one. We'll have more,
Oh
more
yeah,
to
for sure.
come. And so, I just appreciate you all joining us today and have a good rest of your summit.